In this video we are going to consider smoking and depression. Specifically we will consider, does depression cause smoking behavior or does smoking cause depression? Hi, this is an academic paper from 2004 and I thought it is really interesting for all smokers. While the paper does consider youth, it is useful to adults as well as most smokers begin in their youth. Before we begin, I want to thank you for watching this video, and if you like the video, please like, share and subscribe to the channel. This paper is a review of literature in the 2004 period between smoking and depression. It focuses on biological and behavioral research. It examines depression and the risk this has to begin smoking. It also looks at smoking as a risk to becoming depressed, as well as looking at the influence of depression on smoking cessation, antidepressants, and the neurobiology of smoking and genetic influences. This is a really interesting paper, and I will try to keep this at an introductory level, and so the neurobiology of smoking and genetic influences may be looked at in a second video sometime. Epidemiology of smoking. Most everyone knows of the known effects of smoking on respiratory disease, cancer, and heart disease. However, its connection with depression is much less considered by the population. The researchers state that when nicotine interacts with the brain, it perpetuates a pattern of smoking behaviors, and this leads to nicotine addiction. At the time of this article, in 2004, the USA had a smoking prevalence rate of 33% of the population, and it is now about 12.5% according to CDC.gov. However, if we look at people with psychiatric disorders that include depression, mania, anxiety, etc., the prevalence rate is over 50%. Considering depression, as this article does, it is estimated that lifetime depression prevalence is 10 to 25% of women, while 6 to 10% is the prevalence in men. However, if we consider subsyndromal levels of depression, which is a state of sadness that does not quite meet the clinical level of depression, but where the person is suffering with some form of sadness, the prevalence is 16 to 23%, so 1 out of every 4 to 6 people has some sort of sadness or depression that clearly affects them. Looking quickly at the economic effects of depression, in 2004, depression cost the USA employers over $44 billion in lost wages. Thus this is a real societal cost that needs to be addressed, especially in light of what we will see later in the article. Researchers Glassman et al. In 1988 made an important discovery that those presenting at a stop smoking clinic, 60% of them had a past major depression. This is at the very least more than double, really 2.5 times the highest level of depression seen in women, and 10 times more than the lowest level seen in men. Major depression as a vulnerability factor in smoking initiation. The authors state that smoking initiation is likely to be multifactorial. However, in researching adolescents' depressive likelihood and its contribution to smoking, the researchers in one study by Lewinshon et al. Found that 24% of teenagers had at least one major episode of depression. In another research by Escobar et al. Found a moderate association between depression and smoking. That is, while 12.9% of teenagers with subsyndromal levels smoked, almost 20%, or more than 67% higher, of depressed teenagers smoked. Corroborating these studies was a research by Patton et al. They explored adolescence and depression and anxiety and how it affects smoking initiation. They found that anxiety and depression significantly predicted habitual and experimental smoking in places where their friends and acquaintances were also smoking cigarettes. The researchers hypothesized that depression and societal anxiety scores in settings where most peers smoked perhaps contributes in the more willing adoption of smoking and other behavior of their peers. In this same sample, girls with non-smoking peers, and high levels of depression and anxiety were less likely to begin smoking. When looking at these results, it would seem that there is a natural suggestion that environment and social relationships can reduce the possibility of smoking. I know that working with many of my patients, people who quit smoking told me they had to change their friend group in order to more readily accomplish their stop smoking goal. In contrast to the above studies, Tersiak et al., did not find an association between depressive symptoms and peer smoking exposure to smoking initiation behavior. However, in line with the previous studies, they did find a significant correlation between smoking and depression, and that these teenagers were more receptive to tobacco advertising. So while depression and peer smoking did not necessarily make them begin smoking, tobacco advertising was more of a factor, and when they did smoke, these teenagers had a higher level of depression than their non-smoking peers. The researchers' hypothesis was that these teenagers could have poorer refusal skills, and were perhaps not assertive or less assertive than their non-depressed friends and acquaintances. This study controlled for drug and alcohol use, and the conclusion remained, high levels of depression increased smoking. These results are very interesting. However, the authors note the limitations in the studies, and this adds some extra perspective. One limitation is that some research relied on the adolescent's own report of depressive symptoms when filling the questionnaires, and this may not have distinguished trait versus state phenomena of depression, which must be determined as per the researchers. Trait phenomena are patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving that generalize to similar situations systematically among individuals, and remain rather stable in time. In contrast, state is a characteristic pattern in these same thinking, feeling, and behaving in a concrete situation in a specific moment in time. So the research conducted may have categorized depression resulting from a particular situation and time as real depression when this was not. The authors state that even if the depression levels were not met and were only subsyndromal depression, both these level of depression is predictive of future major depression. A second limitation as noted by the authors was that the scale used and its cutoff to determine depression is not necessarily diagnostic of depression. So, we can see there were elements that may have both under and over-reported depression levels. As a side note to this, it is known that exercise, healthy diet, exposure to sunlight during the times of day when the sun is not so strong, before 8 to 10 and after 6 in the summer, usually, as well as other things can help to avoid becoming or remaining depressed, such as for example social relations and interest in a hobby or activity. An interesting note by researchers in the article is that as depression levels continue increasing and being identified at earlier ages, research will continue to give attention to this in future studies. The researchers also state that in these studies other factors may have affected smoking in adolescent and perhaps smoking would not be a comorbidity of depression. One of these factors are externalizing behavior such as aggression and delinquency. Smoking as a vulnerability factor for depression. Whereas the previous studies looked at depression as a risk factor for smoking initiation, these next look at smoking as a risk for becoming depressed. Researchers have said that there is significant epidemiological data that shows smoking is a factor in becoming depressed. In 2000, a research looking at 8 to 14-year-olds and non-depressed revealed that smoking modestly increases the risk of developing depressed mood. This study, in contrast with the previous studies mentioned, disagreed with the view that depression causes smoking in adolescence. The researchers found the direction of cause and effect to be from smoking to depression, that is, they are linked only by the antecedent smoking. Depression causing smoking was not found. In a large study of 8,704 non-depressed adolescents in an exploration of the effect of smoking on depression, revealed that those who were smokers at baseline without depression were more than twice as likely to develop depressive characteristics than those non-smokers at baseline. In a second study of just lower than 7,000 participants, they found an interesting result, but after more research into the data, considering other factors, they found the idea of depression being the stimulus to initiate smoking did not have support. Rather, what was more of a stimulus to smoke was lower self-esteem, alcoholic parent trouble relaxing, alcohol use and bad temper. Authors suggest nicotine may have a direct effect on the central nervous system, resulting in the development of depressive symptoms. Another study, the National Household Survey on Drug Abuse in Children 12 to 17, by Martini et al., gives further evidence that smoking may be closely related with one becoming depressed. They found, and this is important, that the level of depression is greater in current smokers, reduces in previous smokers, and is least in non-smokers. Even more interesting, they found the level of depression symptoms was highest in people most recently having smoked. This indicates that smoking can have very quick effects on depression, and the authors suggest that if smoking causes depression in teenagers, then interventions that reduce smoking may reduce amount of depression felt. Importance of depression on smoking cessation. As mentioned earlier, Glassman et al. Found that 60% of smokers at a stop smoking clinic in 1988 presented having had a major depression sometime. These smokers failed to quit at twice the rate of never depressed smokers. This is really interesting what Glassman et al. Found. This begun a great interest in the relationship between depression and smoking cessation. Following Glassman's discovery, an epidemiological catchment area study data showed that while lifetime prevalence of major depressive disorder was 5.1% in the general population and higher still, 6.6% in daily smokers, it was 2.9% in never smokers. And one-year cessation rates were lower by more than half, 31% to 14%, when these smokers had a history of major depression. These data have been replicated and the authors say appear robust. Glassman et al. Also found that smokers with a past history of major depression may experience more severe nicotine withdrawal symptoms than smokers who were never depressed. These symptoms included depressed mood and concentration difficulty. Even minimal levels of depression was found to affect smoking cessation. Glassman et al. Also found that people who quit smoking and have a history major depression are 7 times more likely to develop a further depressive episode within 6 months compared with those who continued to smoke. This effect was lessened by the antidepressant sertraline. Unlike a withdrawal symptom, the risk of major depression does not happen instantly. It was distributed throughout the half-year period that the authors suggest that nicotine alters vulnerability to depression. In some other research by Glassman et al., they found that smokers who quit and did not develop major depression, withdrawal symptoms tended to abate by day 10. As a side note, withdrawal symptoms have been shown to respond well to exercise and diet, that is, they can be lessened. A last word on the cessation rates when considering depression, the authors mentioned that women are less likely to quit in relation to men. Genes. With respect to genes, I will mention one consideration the authors state, that is the research by McCaffery et al. They studied milder depressive symptoms in an older cohort of twin smokers. They found that individual environmental factors accounts for more of the smoking variance in this specific population than genes. This lead the authors to state that genes may not be so important, at least not in this population when it comes to depression. If you enjoy some of the suggestions I made, and like this content and are interested in quitting smoking, or freeing yourself from food addictions or gambling, and would want to work with me, please write to me at the email resolvingaddiction@gmail.com, where you can make an appointment with me in Rome, Italy if you speak Italian, English, or French, as these are the languages I speak. I want to thank you for watching this video, and if you like the video, please like, share and subscribe to the channel.